Avengers Endgame was a truly epic movie. Fans around the world loved it so much that it's now officially the highest grossing movie of all time. But could it have been even better? Well, we think so, and in this video we'll be looking at some Avengers Endgame bloopers and deleted scenes that would have improved the movie. Let's get started. There's a deleted scene from the final battle of Avengers Endgame that would definitely have been a welcome inclusion in the final movie. It saw Chris Pratt's StarLord in front of the Ravagers, ready to rally the group of space misfits just before the battle began. Most notably, Sean Gunn's Kraglin can be seen in the clip. And given that we didn't end up seeing him in the final movie, it's definitely a shame that scene was deleted. In the scene, Chris Pratt tells everyone not to pull their hamstrings and to warm up their butt cheeks, which are both very Chris Pratt things to say. In Avengers Endgame, Thor and Rocket traveled back to 2014 to get the Reality Stone, which at that time was inside Jane Foster's body on Asgard. While we saw the pair talking to each other a little bit in the movie, a deleted scene shows them having an extended conversation. It starts with Thor relieving himself out of an Asgardian window before he explains to Rocket how difficult it is for him being there, because he's seen nearly everybody he's about to encounter die. He tells Rocket to be more sensitive about the whole thing. It gets across the emotional impact of Thor returning to his home realm and allows us to sympathize with him more than we otherwise did. It also ends with a joke, as Thor tells Rocket that he doesn't know which way they should head, prompting Rocket to respond,
"You don't know? You used to frickin' live here!"
For 1,500 years, not forever.
Avengers Endgame saw Scarlett Johansson's Black Widow and Jeremy Renner's Hawkeye sent to 2014 Vormir to acquire the Soul Stone. After a scuffle between the pair to decide which one was going to sacrifice their life to obtain the powerful item, it was Black Widow who ultimately went over the edge of the cliff. But a deleted scene that was shown to test audiences actually had the pair fighting off Thanos' henchmen, who had been sent there by the Mad Titan to prevent the two Avengers from getting the stone. While the reception of the fight scene was positive, the Russo brothers ultimately decided they wanted the whole thing to be more quiet, intimate, and somber. That does make sense, but one last team-up between the pair before Black Widow died would have been fitting and cool to see, so it may actually have been better to include it. A funny blooper to come from that epic final battle in Avengers Endgame happened courtesy of actress Elizabeth Olsen. As Scarlet Witch, Olsen was walking forward with intent amongst the wreckage of the Avengers headquarters before going over on her ankle and letting out a high-pitched shriek. Now, assuming this was when she was filming the scene in which she approached Thanos, how funny would it have been in the final movie? It would have been hilarious! Heck, a moment like that might even have resulted in Thanos being taken aback and knocked off his game. It could have been the opening the Avengers needed to take him down. Then again, maybe not. Avengers Endgame saw the mission to obtain the Tesseract from the Battle of New York in 2012 go horribly wrong, as Loki escaped with it through a portal to an as-yet unrevealed location. That resulted in Tony Stark and Steve Rogers being forced into an impromptu trip to a SHIELD base in 1970 in order to obtain an older version of the item otherwise known as the Space Stone. But a blooper shows that Robert Downey Jr. reaches in to take the Tesseract prop from where it was stored and breaks it.
I broke it.
And we think it would have been funny if that had been in the final movie. Remember that scene in Family Guy where Peter keeps messing up the past and has to keep asking Death to take him back so he can start over? It could have been something like that. Avengers Endgame was pretty funny, and in spite of the movie's high stakes, that's to be expected of an MCU movie. While it probably didn't need any more laughs, there was one deleted scene that would have certainly had audiences around the world giggling. It was a scene that occurred when the Avengers were sitting around a table in their headquarters, plotting the intricate details of the time heist that would see them traveling to various points in history to acquire the Infinity Stones. While Rocket was discussing the Chitauri, calling them the suckiest army in the galaxy, Tony Stark seemingly took offense to what he was saying and shaved a line into his head using a pair of clippers, leaving the poor little raccoon with a rather hilarious bald patch. There were already humorous moments between Tony and Rocket, most notably when the former mistook the latter for a Build-A-Bear toy, but this would certainly have been just as funny to see.
Right?
It's important to note that not all deleted scenes from Avengers Endgame were actually filmed. Some were merely written into early versions of the script, then deleted before they were ever put into practice. One such scene would have been extremely fun to see, and it involved Chris Hemsworth's Thor. As we all know, Thor had put on quite a lot of weight in Endgame, courtesy of 5 years of feeling like the snap was his fault. But he was brought back into the superhero game as part of the Avengers' mission to acquire the Infinity Stones from different points in history. And originally, there was a plan to include a workout montage for him to get back in shape. A fun 80s style montage like that would have gone down really well with audiences, so it's a real shame it was never filmed. Another scene that was originally written but didn't end up being filmed was Captain America being forced to team up with the Red Skull. The exact circumstances of the scene are unclear, but it would have seen Cap sent to Vormir to retrieve the Soul Stone, then having to collaborate with the red-faced villain in order to acquire it. Obviously, the Red Skull is Cap's most iconic enemy. The two fought during the Second World War and are polar opposites of each other. It would have been incredibly interesting to see how conflicted Cap was about the whole thing. Sadly, the scene didn't make it past the writing process and was deleted before ever being made. One early draft of the Avengers Endgame script had Thanos arriving in 2023 having killed a past version of the Avengers. The alternate script would have seen 2014 Thanos head to Earth to kill the then present-day Avengers while Ebony Maw was tinkering with Nebula's time travel tech. And you know that scene where the Mad Titan was sitting patiently waiting for Iron Man, Captain America, and Thor to confront him outside the destroyed Avengers compound? Well, the plan was to have him throw the decapitated head of past Captain America at his 2023 counterpart. Now, while it's understandable that it wasn't included in the final movie, it needed to be kid-friendly after all, it would undoubtedly have been awesome and would certainly have sent the message that Thanos wasn't messing around this time.
I think it's gratuitous, but whatever.
Now, back to some scenes that were actually filmed, and while this one might seem a little mundane in comparison to some of the others, we would actually like to have seen it included in the final movie. It shows Tony Stark and Pepper Potts in their kitchen, with Pepper preparing lunch for their daughter Morgan. It also has Pepper complaining about the fact that the couple's alpaca Gerald, who we see at the start of the movie, had eaten all of their goji berries. The scene ends with Tony going outside to bring Morgan inside to eat her lunch, which is presumably the scene we saw in the final movie when she was wearing the rescue armor helmet. It was just a nice, simple scene showing Tony and Pepper's home life, and anything involving an alpaca is always better, right? Another deleted scene had Don Cheadle's James Rhodes and Chris Evans' Captain America talking to each other in the Avengers headquarters, discussing what happened to the Tesseract after Steve crash-landed the Red Skull's Valkyrie aircraft at the end of Captain America: The First Avenger. Cap's answer was that it ended up at the bottom of the ocean, but the conversation continued after that. Rhodey then questioned why Steve actually had to crash the plane at all, and Steve replied it was because there were bombs on board. But Rhodey wasn't finished there either. He proceeded to ask,
"And you couldn't have jumped out of the plane before you crashed it?"
It was a fun scene that gave insight into an 8-year-old MCU movie, and also asked a legitimate question about whether or not Cap even had to do what he did in the way he did all those years ago.
You know, I keep telling everybody they should move on and...
There was a nice scene in Avengers Endgame in which Tony Stark got some closure with and a greater understanding of his father Howard. It came when Tony and Steve Rogers were forced into that impromptu trip back to 1970 where they infiltrated a S.H.I.E.L.D. base in order to acquire the Tesseract. Tony inadvertently encountered his father, who obviously didn't know who he was but felt an obvious sense of familiarity with his future son. In a deleted scene, just after they'd been discussing the idea of fatherhood, Howard actually offered Tony a job, and it would have been nice to see him gain that level of acceptance from his father in the final movie. Of course, Tony was forced to refuse the offer, citing the reason that he was a little tied up in futures right now, but it would certainly have made him feel like his father would have been proud of him, which is cool. Stormbreaker is an awesome weapon, and Thor looks incredibly cool when he's wielding it. But wouldn't it be funny to see him mess up with it from time to time? Well, one blooper caught on camera during the filming of Avengers Endgame saw exactly that happening. Remember that scene at the start of the movie when Thor stood in front of Carol Danvers, then summoned Stormbreaker, and even though it flew past Carol's head really fast, she just stood there calmly without so much as a care in the world? Well, this blooper occurred during the filming of that scene, as Chris Hemsworth fumbled the prop as it was propelled into his hand. The scene was meant to show how awesome Danvers was, and she certainly would have looked even more awesome in comparison to a Thor who couldn't even catch his own weapon properly. There was a funny moment in Avengers Endgame when the Avengers were trying to decide who should wear the Stark Tech Infinity Gauntlet and snap their fingers to bring the victims of the decimation back into existence. When Thor was putting forward his case to be the one who donned the glove, he asked if everyone knew what was coursing through his veins at that moment, and Rhodey replied,
"Cheese whiz."
Well, there's a deleted scene / blooper in which Don Cheadle replied Funyuns and caused Chris Hemsworth to laugh.
Yes.
Not only do we think Funyuns was a funnier answer, but it also makes us think it might have been funnier to hear several answers to Thor's question in the final movie. At the end of Avengers Endgame, Tony Stark's MCU tenure came to a heroic and emotional end as he got his hands on all 6 Infinity Stones and snapped his fingers to erase Thanos and his army from existence, sacrificing his own life in the process. He went quietly with 4 immortal words: "I am Iron Man." but a deleted scene depicted a more fitting goodbye for the character, with every major hero left standing on the battlefield proceeding to kneel out of respect for what he'd just done. Tony Stark deserved that. Granted, we got the brief funeral scene, but a huge show of respect in the immediate aftermath of an act that quite literally saved the universe would certainly have been a welcome inclusion in the movie. This scene came immediately following that mass show of respect for Tony Stark on the battlefield. At the end of Avengers Endgame, we saw StarLord showing signs of wanting to find the 2014 version of Gamora, who was brought to 2023 in the movie's third act. But the fact is, we weren't even sure if she was still alive. She did come to 2023 as part of Thanos' army after all, and they all got dusted. But this deleted scene showed her walking away from the battle while everyone else was kneeling, and that was after the Mad Titan and his minions had been dusted. Including this scene in the movie would have at least confirmed that Gamora was still alive, which would certainly have been a good thing to know. So what did you think of this video? Do you think these bloopers and deleted scenes would have made Avengers Endgame even better? Let us know your thoughts in the comment section below, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to ScreenRant for more great videos like this one. Bye for now!